Right, so hey everyone, welcome to this month's community call, which is also our first this year. So I'm very happy to see everyone again. So I'm Faye. If you haven't met each other before, I'm the community manager here at Tribe 29. And for those who are joining us for the first time, community calls are online events where we discuss topics around Checkmk, share product updates and other general updates around the community. So right now, let's see who's with us today. Yeah, some people from Tribe 29, some partners, a lot of community members. Yeah, thanks so much for being with us today because we are trying a different time today. So usually we do this in the evening, but now we're trying somewhere in the afternoon, Central European time, around morning, US Eastern. So I hope it works for everyone. I hope you like this timing better, but then just let us know if it doesn't work and you would want a different timing. Right, so before we start, perhaps just some reminders about the event. So this call will be recorded and streamed on YouTube. And just please keep yourself muted when not talking, but then just feel free to type in your questions in the chat. So I think it will be manageable and just give us some time to go through them and then ask them to our speaker. So maybe just some community updates as well. So I have small news. So we have a new community hero from February. So Christian, I'm not sure if you're here, but then if you're here, yeah, just please wave. You're a new community hero. So the community hero badge on the forum is granted to those who has at least 50 solutions in the forum. And this is pretty special because only 6 people out of 4,000 have this badge in the forum. So yeah, Christian, thanks a lot for your help, for all your time and effort in the forum. Thanks so much. I think in behalf of the Checkmk community whom you've helped, thank you so much for all the help that you have provided everyone. And also, about the Checkmk conference. So in case you don't know yet, we will be doing a physical conference again after 2 years of doing an online one. It will be held on the 3rd until the 5th of May this year in Palaner Nocherberg here in Munich, in our hometown here in Munich. And the regular ticket prices will end on the 4th of April. So yeah, if you don't want to miss this pricing, so please book before that, and you can just check all the details in checkmk.com/conference. So yeah, oh, that's not yet. We will check that later. Then I think that's all from my side. So Martin, are you ready? Just gonna check if everything's working on your side. Right, so today we will be talking about Kubernetes monitoring, and we have Martin, the product owner of the Kubernetes monitoring in Checkmk. And yeah, just feel free to put in your questions here and we will go through them. And we will be very happy to receive your feedback. So just to clarify as well, so these features that Martin will show will be in Checkmk 2.1, which is currently in beta. So we don't recommend that the use the Checkmk beta version in production environment, but then please feel free to test it out and give us your feedback. So we will be very happy to hear your feedback on this one. Right, so let's give the floor to Martin.
Hey everyone, also welcome from my side. I'm gonna share my screen. As you can see, it will not be a lot of slides. It will be mostly demo today. And 2 topics I want to touch upon. First is what you will get with the new Kubernetes monitoring. And the second part, where I'd like to spend a lot of time, is on how to get there. Because our goal is that a lot of you actually start trying it also during the beta phase, so that we get some feedback already during that time. Helps us to adapt things if something is necessary. Let's start with actually what you get. I have a site running with 2 clusters which I'm monitoring, and we can take a look at that. And then I'm going to walk you through all the things which are new. And after that, we go into the basically getting there. I think the main thing which you will see is on my side is that I actually start with the new dashboards which we have. I'm currently running a beta 2.1 site. I'm on a daily build and I made some modifications myself, which will be part of the next beta release, hopefully. And these are the dashboards. Plan so far is that you will find them under applications. And if you select Kubernetes, you will start with what I call the cluster overview. And for many users, we know that they have actually multiple clusters in the monitoring, and then actually navigating through all these clusters, navigating through all this Kubernetes information can be very complicated. And we try to simplify that for users a little bit so that the complexity of Kubernetes is a little bit abstracted, and it's easier to find problems, find the root causes of problems, and find the stuff. These are things which are currently in progress, especially dashboards. More things will be added over time, but here's our first glimpse already. I have two clusters here. One is our internal cluster running in our own environment. That's where we'll also then install the Checkmk agent afterwards to run inside Kubernetes. And the other one is our AWS cluster. And let's take a look at our AWS cluster. And the nice thing which you will see is you will be able to navigate from one dashboard to another dashboard. They are all basically interconnected, and they are all context driven. So you can actually, this is a cluster dashboard for AWS. The cluster dashboard for our internal cluster looks the same, but has different data. Yeah, and it should provide you with a quick overview on issues which you have in your cluster, health and performance of it, and couple of things which are probably important is that always check if, for example, these things are all okay. These are the things which display if your cluster is actually receiving data, or basically your monitoring is receiving data from Kubernetes. We have multiple ways how we get information. Actually, we'll get to that later. Let's first look at these fancy graphs, and then look how we get there later. You can go from these cluster dashboards to more detailed dashboards. You can also, each graph can actually take you even further down. One of the typical use cases I have is I look, where do I have my high consumers, for example, where do I have my problems? Yeah, and you can, for example, use these views down here to sort by the parameters here, for example, to identify, okay, which of my deployments has a lot of CPU usage, for example, which of my deployments has a lot of memory usage. And then if I realize, okay, hey, by the way, there seems to be something wrong with the replicas on that one, I can actually go into that one to look into my respective deployment dashboard. And then I would see here, okay, how was the performance over time? What happened? I did a couple of things in this cluster around noon. That's why we have a lot of action happening there. And you can also see that immediately there is actually a problem in here. I would like to have 6 replicas on this deployment running. I have 6 updated, but I only have 5 ready. You can also see that in the graph here that basically 1 is pending, 5 are running. And then down here, you can see for one, each individual pod allocated to this deployment. And you can see one of them is actually having an issue. We could actually go from here to the pod directly to see that, but we can also see down here what are the deployment problems. For example, here, this pod is pending for 25 minutes. The replicas on it there, yes?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. So Ferdinand is just telling that there's some delays when you move around. So can you just move your mouse slower?
Sure.
And, yeah, and also we have some question. We have question from Thomas. So maybe people from on YouTube are also curious about this. Like, is this for the Enterprise Edition only, or also for the Raw Edition?
So the dashboards will be Enterprise Edition only, but the general availability of Kubernetes monitoring is possible in the Raw Edition as well. But we will get to a couple of things when we implement it, where it's easier if you have the Enterprise Edition to get started and get going. And okay, any other question?
None yet. That's all for now.
Now we are here at the case where we see, hey, there is a deployment has a problem. We see some pod is still pending, some pod doesn't get, isn't running for some reason, isn't being properly scheduled. And we can then take a look, okay, what is the actual problem of that? And go into the pod, for example, and then we see, okay, the actual services as we are used in Checkmk. I'm going to zoom a little bit in. You can see, okay, here, this is the classical host services overview. we have for all these Kubernetes objects, we have hosts with services. You can always use that if you want to. For example, if you use the raw edition, you will always have this information where you can then find your way around. So you will still have the typical Checkmk monitoring available. You will just not have these dashboards which help you navigate around and battle the complexity of Kubernetes. Here you can immediately see what is the problem. So we decided to have always only one, maximum 2 services which go critical on default. For a pod, it's the status. And the status mimics basically the behavior of kubectl. So what you see in kubectl, if you do kubectl get pods, this is basically what you see in here. And it provides also, like our monitoring provides some meta information to show you, okay, hey, what is the problem? And you can see basically the condition, it's not being scheduled. Yeah. And the reason why it's not scheduled, there are no nodes available because there are too many pods in our cluster. And then then it's very easy for you to find out, okay, hey, how do you actually troubleshoot that? You either add more nodes to your cluster, or you, best solution would be to add probably more nodes to your cluster. Let's go back into our starting point to go actually again into one of the clusters here. You can also look into other objects. For example, you can see the daemon sets, also stateful sets. There's none running in this one. And you can see what are the cluster problems. And I have to zoom out a little bit for you to properly see them. So basically, all the problems that you have, they're also being shown so that you have immediately a view. And there you would be also able to view, okay, hey, the nodes itself here, if you look at that, the nodes do not have enough pods available. The pod resources have a problem. You can also see that basically here, there are 0 free pods in this cluster available. And then you can solve your problems much easier. At least I can. What is nice, what we also added in the new Kubernetes monitoring is that you natively get more information on the nodes itself. If you, for example, if you go to one of our nodes, then you can see here, it's actually not just Kubernetes information which you get, but you also get the information which you used from the classical Checkmk agent. So it's not just, okay, what is the condition of this node, but it's also, okay, hey, the CPU load. So things which are not related to Kubernetes, the file system, kernel performance, number of threads, uptime. These are things which are basically stuff that Checkmk agent is providing to us. And the Checkmk agent is automatically deployed as well with the new Kubernetes monitoring if you use it. Yeah. And there you can then see, for example, hey, here, this node is not has no pods free, therefore nothing can be scheduled on it.
Martin, we got a question.
Yes.
So is it possible to run the beta and the version 2.0 at the same time against the same Kubernetes cluster?
Yes. Okay.
Thomas has a comment, sorry. No network interfaces?
Yes, so we decided to take the network interfaces out for the time being because what happens in Kubernetes, you get all the Kali interfaces, and there are plenty of them. They're constantly being shown, not shown. You will get a lot of false alerts if you monitor network interfaces this way. We are currently considering how we actually monitor networks on the nodes. Right now, there is no real good solution to monitor them without getting false alerts.
That's all the questions we have.
Then I'd say we take a look into installing that so that I'd like to provide a little bit of a how-to guide so that everybody after the community call can just try it out themselves and see how it works for their clusters, and ideally give us feedback if they run into any problem. Yeah. For that, most important thing is that where do you find the information? Yeah. The best thing is you basically clone our repository on GitHub with a Checkmk kube agent. That's the classical command. You can find it in here, and it contains basically the Kubernetes collector and everything around it. And to explain that a little bit, how we actually implemented the new Kubernetes monitoring is different to the old one. The old one was basically only relying on the information from the Kubernetes API. But that only provides you limited information on stuff. You cannot get performance metrics on the individual containers. It's just limited in the way it is. And in the new Kubernetes monitoring, we basically take two data sources which you can combine. And the first one which you always need is the Kubernetes API. That's the basis for creating all the objects inside Checkmk. The other connection is optional. And we recommend that you have it because without it, I don't think Kubernetes monitoring is really usable, because this really provides the real juice. Yeah, this provides CPU metrics, memory metrics to help you really judge, do you have performance problems in your cluster? And we have a cluster collector pod running, or actually it's a deployment running inside Kubernetes. And we basically query that. It's offering an API to get all this information. And this cluster collector receives from each node collector information on the nodes, from basically a Checkmk agent and a C advisor, which contains all the container metrics. And the combined thing together to set it up, you can find basically in our GitHub repository here under Checkmk kube agent. And to download it or to clone it, you can just go here, code, clone, this one, standard Git stuff. You can also go individually to, for example, because you don't need everything, you just need the stuff under deploy. If you go to deploy, then to charts Checkmk, you will find Helm charts, which make the entire installation quite easy. And in here, you just need to get the stuff which is in here. You need to get all the files in this folder and in the templates. And let's, get started and do it.
Hey, Martin, I have to maybe before you start, maybe let's answer some questions.
Yes.
Someone's asking, Joel is asking, how about cron jobs, and PVs, PVCs?
Will come soon.
Okay, great. Thomas has a comment to follow up from his question earlier, but still, then one doesn't know how much network traffic a node has.
Yeah, we will add that over time. So right now, there are too many problems with the Kali interfaces. And the problem is, like all these interfaces, we have to define which ones we actually want to get and which is the right interface to show the actual stuff. But we will add that over time. So I think we have a couple of weeks until final release. I believe that we can add that over time. We just need a little bit more data from the field. I think sooner or later you will have the interface information as well.
Right. So one last thing. So from Paolo, is there any monitoring related to I/O? So I think input, output.
Yes. On the nodes, yes. Let me quickly show that. We have, where is it? We should have one on, we have our file system. This guy should be there. Or maybe we took that out as well, because the way how information is being delivered, we're using a modified Checkmk agent for the nodes. Because I think a lot of users, which I got feedback, have the issue, if you're running actually a Checkmk agent on a Kubernetes node, this will not be possible. Let's take AWS. You might not be able to run Checkmk agent on these nodes externally. Openshift, you can't run Checkmk agents on nodes. And so we had to basically find a different way how to actually get that going. And we're using a modified Checkmk containerized agent, and that can't give all the data. This guy, I'm pretty sure at some point I saw. I have to check why I don't see it right now. Could be a bug. We are using a daily version of Checkmk beta, so.
Some more follow-up questions from Joel. Sorry. So about the Checkmk agent, what direction is the communication from the container to the Checkmk monitoring instance, or the other way around? Escape.
It's basically from. I'm going to go to the one here again, and you can see it. So this one is basically, we pull the information from the cluster collector. The node collectors send via a Kubernetes service the information to the cluster collector. Let me quickly go to one of these nodes, because here
I think that answers his question. But yes.
Here, by the way, we have disk IO, and that shows basically here I'm now on our internal cluster, which is running Ubuntu nodes, as you can see here, whereas before the other thing which you saw were Amazon Linux nodes. And they are different to an Ubuntu node. And I mean, you know, like the Checkmk agent, you have different agents for different stuff around, and not every operating system gives you all the information that you want. So you might not be able to see all the information. On an Ubuntu, for example, you will see all these things. On Amazon Linux, you saw, for example, you didn't see disk IO. And that's what I meant. We need more data. So we are currently adding, trying this cluster collector, this node collector, also on a little bit more edge cases to see where do we not get, for example, some metrics. And then based on that information, we will adapt our cluster collector.
Right, one more thing. So from Joel again. So about the Checkmk agent, is Openshift supported? Does the container run on Openshift without special privileges?
So for Openshift, we will basically, for now, I will show you later. Then you will see it directly. What happens if you use Openshift for now?
That's all we have for now.
I have to quickly run a preparation. I need to get rid of the agent which is currently running, so I just deleted the agent running on my internal cluster. I unfortunately also deleted it from AWS. So right now we have actually a Kubernetes cluster here, which is soon not running any of our cluster collectors anymore, so that we have a clean system where we then can install everything. We will then also set up a clean site as well. Let's see, almost terminated everything. So now it's basically no Checkmk is running on that, no Checkmk collector is running anymore in my Kubernetes. And so is this easily readable for everyone? Okay.
I think it is.
Yeah. I already cloned the repository for me. You can see basically the files are in here. And I think, let me quickly reset everything so that I have basically a very clean version. Important, switch to the 1.0.0 branch. Because on the main branch, that's our development branch. That's basically the latest stuff, but the stable stuff will be on the 1.0.0 branch or whatever branch we're currently on. So if you try things out from there, always go to a stable branch or a better branch, and don't try to work from the main branch. Yeah. To install it, there's actually instructions which you can find in the repository. Yeah, there's some prerequisites. You need a new Kubernetes version, you need Helm running, and then basically it's quite straightforward. You just have to run this command. And important is here, you have to obviously replace a couple of these things, like in which workspace do I want to have that running? I call it the Checkmk monitoring workspace. Release name, you can just pick any. Same for your namespace, you can pick whatever you want. And Helm charts always work that they basically can be configured with a values YAML, or however you call it. So we have to also give that to it. Don't forget the point, because otherwise you have to run it from within this folder, because it requires all the stuff which is in this folder to be actually working. And if you do that, it's basically already installed like that. And there are a couple of things in here which will help you try if everything has worked. The first thing which I would always do is export the tokens and the certificates, because you will need them later for configuring and enabling the Checkmk monitoring. And if you use the Helm charts, you will get the commands which you need immediately. They're in here, the export token and export certificate command. And you can just basically run them. And I think I ran them twice now. Let's see if I actually got it. Yeah, and then you directly have the token in here. Simplifies your life later on. If you've worked with the old Kubernetes monitoring, this should be familiar, but now it's a little bit simpler to get actually to the stuff. You don't have to fumble around with some commands, you get them immediately. You can actually test the access directly in here. If you use this command, for example, and see if everything is actually working how you expect it. Yeah. This basically starts a pod inside the Kubernetes cluster, which then checks an endpoint on the cluster collector to see what is actually happening. And you can see here basically some meta information around the node collectors. And this looks like, okay, everything is running. They're running on there. The right stuff is running on it as expected. The other things you can do is you can just take a look, are all the pods there? All the pods are running. Everything should be okay. For actually getting the data from the outside, you need to have some way of communication. Typically, way is you have a service, a Kubernetes service, which then connects, or which is basically accessible from the outside. Two ways to do that. One is an ingress. This is, I think, the recommended way, because an ingress, you can manage secure communications via an ingress. Typically, you have some ingress and load balancer already set up so that you can easily enable that. That would be what we would recommend. In this case, it's our internal cluster here, what we're doing. We can also enable communication via node port. So basically a port on any worker node is forwarding the communications to the respective service, and then from the service to our cluster collector. And that's what we will do right now. And for this, the only thing which we have to do is, because this is not enabled on default, so how you communicate with the cluster collector to the outside is very dependent how your Kubernetes is being set up. We go to the values YAML, and we change one thing. So from top to down, we try to look where we actually find the element. Can't I see it? Am I blind? Here it is, the service. And here, if you, for example, want to expose the Kubernetes collector via node port, you can actually just do it here by changing this to node port and specifying the node port. If you do this, you can run the command from before again. One thing is we don't need to create the namespace anymore. That's already done. And there's a neat little thing which I really like about Helm is the command Helm diff, which will show you what actually changed from the current one to the next one, which I'm planning to upgrade to. And if you use Helm diff, you can see, hey, what has changed? Basically, the service here, the definition for the service has changed. We are now running a node port instead of a cluster IP, and on this port we are running that. And if you say, okay, I always do it to check, did I actually do the stuff correctly? And if I see that and I see, okay, it makes sense, then I just change that, adapt it. And if we now take a look at our services in the Checkmk monitoring namespace, then we can see it changed already to a node port. And by this, it's accessible now for me on the port 3035 on a node. What we'll do now is we just create the classical stuff on Kubernetes, on Checkmk. We create a new Checkmk site. So we create a community call. That is all, should be doable quickly. So that we have a clean site, so that's easy for everyone to reproduce that. Any questions so far?
Yes. So someone's asking, does it work with a Kubernetes setup with multiple control planes with restricted RBAC?
We can take a look at the RBAC. The RBAC, obviously, if we don't have the rights, we can't get the data. But it's pretty easily, like the RBAC which we have is not very, let's go to the manifests, then we can see it directly here. It's Checkmk service account. You can see this is the RBAC, and these are the things which we need. If we don't get them, if we can't get the stuff from the Kubernetes API, there's no way how we can monitor this stuff. That's just how it is. Does it answer your question?
So he's on YouTube, so that might take a while.
Okay.
But another question from him. So will Prometheus monitoring for Kube API endpoints still exist?
Yeah, that still exists, so that you can continue using the Prometheus integration. By the way, there's also now an integration for the Prometheus Alert Manager. So if you want to integrate alerts from there, you can easily do that nowadays from Checkmk 2.1 on.
A question from Thomas. Okay, but the chart doesn't have a setting for an ingress you can deploy at the same time, right? You have to create an ingress afterwards.
Let me go to it. Chart, Checkmk. If you want to run an ingress, you would have to enable it here, and you would have to adapt the stuff down here based on your ingress configuration. Important is that it basically has as a host the cluster collector, and you have to adapt that to the service of the cluster collector. Yeah. And then you can run them in parallel, of course. Okay.
Right. He says thanks. So I think that's all the questions we have for now.
Yeah. Let's go to our Checkmk site. So there start community call. So this is now what I'm using is a daily build of the beta from Tuesday, I think. From Tuesday. First thing we do is we just, as always, we create a Piggyback host. I call it like this. We change IP address family to no IP because we will not ping that one. That's it. We create a folder where we will then store all the objects. We don't have to do it. I just find it very easier if you do it. Helps you a little bit structure your entire monitoring. And the next thing as we do is use the password store, always recommended, to save the token. Because from 2.2 or 2.1, password store is a little bit nicer. We have to quickly get the, fortunately, with the command which we used before, you can just get the token like that, copy it, paste it in here. Then we have the token for accessing the Kubernetes cluster. And also there's the API and the cluster collector both use the same token. And we add the certificate as well, because we want to have secure communications, obviously, to the Kubernetes API. We will also add secure communications to the cluster collector in the next step. But first, let's get the CR certificate. So now we have the token and the certificate in our cluster. Next thing is we configure the rule. The rule is the Kubernetes rule inside VM Cloud Container. There's a new rule. Be mindful, the old Kubernetes monitoring is deprecated. If you used to use the old Kubernetes monitoring, you will have to configure things anew, because we changed everything how you monitor Kubernetes in 2.1. So there was no way how we could migrate that. We add a rule, and you have to call the cluster, you have to give the cluster a name, because if you monitor multiple clusters, for example, as I don't know if Joel asked that, if you have multiple control planes or multiple clusters, don't know what you actually talked about. If you have multiple clusters, you need to differentiate all the clusters, and you do that with the cluster name. Use the token which we just saved in the password store. And here we enter the IP address of any control plane node. If you have multiple control plane nodes, you can just use one of them. I have one, mine has this IP. You can also use DNS, you can use URL. I just use the IP here, and I have a different port. Obviously, you want to verify the certificate. And this is the really interesting part, the new part. You want to enrich your Kubernetes data with the usage data from the Checkmk cluster collectors, the things which we just deployed in our cluster. And for that, you have to configure that. You have to either at the ingress here, which you configured before. I configured now a node port. So I add the address of a node. My node is reachable under this address and under this node port, which I configured before. So any node is fine. If you use node port for ingress, you just enter the ingress in here. Right now I use HTTP. We will change the HTTPS for the node port that's relevant if you use that. For the ingress, it's all very different anyway. As we have HTTP running at the moment, obviously it doesn't make sense to do certificate verification. You can configure which information you collect right now. This is what we have available now. We are currently adding more information. We are currently adding namespaces. We'll also add services, all the other things inside Kubernetes over the next couple of weeks, months. Also then anything which doesn't make it into 2.1 will be delivered via patch release in the coming months. You can restrict to namespaces. If you just say, hey, I only want to monitor these couple of namespaces, you can basically say, I want to only monitor maybe default, blah, blah, whatever. You can also do a inverse exclusion. Yeah, if you say I want to monitor everything, but for example the system namespace kube system, you could do it like this. I want to monitor everything. You have to set on the condition the host on which this is then being run on. This is the one which I just created.
Joel is asking, is it possible to restrict by Kubernetes labels?
No. But you can ask him if he has any use case for that, because then we can think about it. I never heard it from anyone, but maybe he can explain a little bit around that, why it would help him. Okay, let's activate the changes. Then we can see if everything worked out. Let's see. So we have our, okay. Seems that it kind of worked. We have to discover the services. You can do, I mean, in Checkmk, hundreds way how to get it. I always do it this way. I go to edit services in here. I check what is on that. And I can see already find a couple of things, accept that all. And now we only have the one host, yeah, because all the stuff, the piggyback stuff is not there yet. But let's first look at the cluster host to get an understanding. Yeah. So here that's the host which represents the entire cluster. It has a couple of services which help you determine if everything is working. The one is called the cluster collector, which tells you on how many nodes are collectors running. If you have, for example, 0 in here, that means somehow no cluster collector data is coming in. Yeah, then you have to do troubleshooting on there. You have the Kubernetes API. If you have, for example, problems with the API server, with etcd, this will show it in here. The Checkmk service itself, this will go crit if the API connection to the Kubernetes API from Checkmk doesn't work, is wrongly configured, for example, if the token is missing, if the endpoint is not correct, then you will see it in this one. We can already see some usage information. Memory sources is already from the beginning there. The usage needs one check cycle because it's a differential compute which is being happening there. So you always need 2 values from the CPU resources because of CPU time which is being calculated there in Kubernetes, and that's why we always need 2. That's in the beginning, it's always 0. After the first check cycle, it will then be a proper value. As you can see, 1.9 now. Yeah. What we're missing now is all the other objects, and that's where you have the difference between Checkmk Enterprise and Checkmk Raw. In Checkmk Enterprise, you have the dynamic configuration daemon. In Checkmk Raw, you have to manually add these piggyback hosts, or you have to write a script which then feeds the stuff to the REST API, but you have to do that somehow. In the Enterprise Edition, it's a little bit more comfortable. I just go to dynamic host management. I add a connection. I give this connection some title. Let's call it cube. I create them in the folder which I just created, and I ensure that they're being deleted, the hosts which don't have piggyback data, because Kubernetes is dynamic. You will have a lot of pods being created, being deleted. That's why I always delete my vanished hosts, otherwise my monitoring starts to clutter. One thing, you can click here, show more, and you can also restrict the source hosts. And I recommend doing that as well. Restrict it to the one which we have just created before, so that only this rule applies on that one host. Okay. We have to do a little nice workaround at the moment, which will be fixed in one of the next beta versions. We have to enable the web API, because in 2.1 the web API is disabled by default, but you can just enable it again by going to the global settings for it. And once we have that, let's activate the dynamic configuration, and you can see already all the Piggyback hosts, all the Kubernetes objects are being recognized, are being created. And you can also see the naming convention which we implemented. It always starts with the object name, pod, for example, node, deployment. Next element is the cluster, internal. Then is the namespace, and then is the name of the object. For non-namespace object like nodes, you just have the object, the cluster, and the object name. And let's see if it already has finished. Yes. And now we can take a look at all these things here, and we can see basically all is a couple of them are already there. You can take a look at that stuff. You can already see, and here's one of the things which really changed from Kubernetes 1.0 to 2.0 and the monitoring is the way how the alerting works on default. Before, this would immediately, because there's one condition which is false, would have led to an alert. As you know, in Kubernetes, sometimes it needs time to fix itself. We decided not to alert immediately. We always decided, hey, give Kubernetes some time to fix itself. If it can fix itself, don't alert. If it doesn't fix itself, then alert. And here's an example, the replicas, they're currently at 0 out of 1 already. So somehow one is not being spawned or not being basically scheduled. And it's basically counting now for how long is it not ready. And the rule set is configured in a way that after 5 minutes, it goes to a warn, and after 10 minutes to critical, because typically if something is wrong and Kubernetes fixes itself, 5 to 10 minutes should be enough. If for your class it's different, you can obviously change that rule. You can say, for me, I want to be alerted immediately. I want to be alerted in a couple of hours only, however you wish. Questions? Because this is basically how you get it running already completely.
None yet, but Ralph has a comment about the use case about the Kubernetes label. So it could be that developers could use a label to define that the pod, etc., should be monitored.
Mm-hmm. Has the only problem that I always want to see everything, obviously. Maybe reach out to me afterwards. I leave my email address in the end, and then we just have a one-on-one discussion on that, because I'd like to understand more about it. Because when I understand more about it, then we can adapt that towards it. One of the things which you're, for example, also planning is if you add an annotation to a pod to say, this is the alerting which I want to, for example, be alerted on a usage of 0.1. You can add this as an annotation in the future to your pod, and then Checkmk will read that annotation and adapt the alerting to that. So that you basically have this infrastructure as code component. The developers define the alerting themselves, and Checkmk then adapts to the alerting defined by the developers.
Yeah, so we have, oh, sorry.
No, ask the question.
So from Thomas, there was a node service on the control plane, which reported that 3 nodes were found, but none of them are. I don't remember the wording, but it basically said there are no masters. Did I see this correctly?
Yeah, so it's on this one, it will be a little bit different. Here, we have no control plane nodes found. That always depends on how your cluster exposes that stuff. Yeah. If there are, let's say you're in AWS, you will not be able to see any control planes nodes. Here, however, I agree, it should be counted 1. And I don't know why it is that way. I have to get back to the developer to find out why it actually says 0 and not 1. Because there's one control plane node running in here, and that should be visible. So that is clearly a bug and good. But in AWS, for example, it will show you no control plane nodes found because you don't have them. AWS is managing them for you.
Maybe I'll follow up to his question. Is this attributed to the role a node has?
Yes. We had the question, what happens if you have Openshift? If you have Openshift, for now, you can use most of it, but there's a big but, yeah. The one thing is you cannot enrich the stuff with the data from the cluster collector. That's something which we will be working on soon. A couple of peculiarities around Openshift which don't let you get the data which you need that as easily as on Google, as on Microsoft Azure, as on AWS, as on VMware, Tanzu, whatever. Openshift is very restrictive, and the other thing is Openshift is using CIO as a container runtime, and you can make it work, but it requires a lot of fumbling around, a lot of actually allowing things, and we want to find a better way for that. And that's why at the moment, what you would have to do is you basically do it like this. You will not get performance data for now. We will see quickly what happens if you do it like this. Let's go to our this one here. Let's trigger the check. So first thing is the collector info is gone because there's no collector running anymore and not being requested. And now what you see is basically you just see the requests and limits and allocatable for CPM memory. So you don't see here, what we will see soon is basically that usage is not being reported anymore. But you get your limits and requests and allocatable. It's very similar like the current Kubernetes monitoring then. So if you use the current Kubernetes monitoring, you will feel at home now. And the other thing which will be different for now is if you look at at a node, a couple of plugins will not deliver data as well because the Checkmk agent is not running on your nodes anymore. And we can see which ones they are, like they're also listed up here. Yeah, but so it's basically the very useful Checkmk agent service. It's the CPU load service, the CPU utilization service, the disk IO summary, the file system, kernel performance, memory, number of threads, and uptime will be gone. Yeah. And that's when we currently talk about Openshift, this is basically the thing which is on our radar and which we want to solve soon, is basically support that you also get these metrics in Openshift.
Joel has a question. Any approximate timeline for the Openshift in the collector?
Depends how complicated it is. So what we already got easily working was the node stuff. You just have to allow Checkmk to use host path and a couple of other things. Don't know if you will get that through, to be honest. I think we have to go a little bit of a different architectural approach. The good thing is when we developed this architecture in the beginning, we built it in a way that you can actually use different data sources for getting this usage data. So right now, it's basically this as a data source. We could also replace this in Openshift with a different concept. So we just say another data source is providing this usage information, for example, the Openshift API. And then we just ingest the Openshift API to feed the usage data to our Kubernetes special agent, and then problem solved. So but we are currently trying to finalize everything for non-OpenShift, and as soon as Checkmk 2.1 is out, that will be rather soon, depending on the beta feedback, we will then focus on OpenShift. Here you can already see the stale services. So what you will continue to have is the condition, the containers, the CPU resources, info, kubelet. Kubelet is quite important because if the kubelet is not working, your node will not be able to run any pods or be able to get any stuff scheduled. Happened to us quite often actually in our internal cluster for various reasons.
So Thomas is asking, this demo cluster is on which Kubernetes version? Is it the latest one?
So our AWS, I think, is on 1.23. So what is the command for version, kubectl version? So here our internal is on 1.21, but our AWS is on that's on also on 1.21. But we tried it in Azure on 1.23 because Azure has always the latest Kubernetes stuff, and on 1.23 it's also working.
I think that's all the questions we have for now.
Okay, let's take a quick look at how to, if you're using Node port for some reason, and you're not using Ingress to ensure secure communications, how to get that done if you use Node port, for example. There are two elements to secure communication. The one thing which is always secure, should be always secure, that's is basically a connection from the Kubernetes API. The other thing is, which we will talk about now, is basically the connection from the cluster collector to the Kubernetes special agent, as well as the communication within the cluster. So you can also ensure, for example, that the cluster collector and the node collectors are speaking via HTTPS with each other. And for that to happen, we have to go to our values YAML, and we need to enable TLS communication. And it's almost as simple as that if there wouldn't be the things with certificates. So let's add the certificates as well. I created some certificates before. Sharing them here, obviously, because it's our internal cluster where you don't have access anyway. First, we need a key. This depends how you have your certificate set up. I just have here some self-signed certificates to get that working. I'm by far an expert for these things. So let me just do, so we also need the certificate for that. On the repository and on GitHub, you will find also some information how you have to configure the certificates, what kind of alt names you, for example, need. So now great, fantastic. Now let's do a nice indentation. So now we have our certificates in there, which we need. We have enabled it. Let's save that. And we don't need this. We need one thing. We need the CR certificate also in Checkmk. Let's copy that. Go to Checkmk to the certificates and add it as well. Okay. Don't need this anymore. Let's do again our Helm diff to see what has actually now happened. Wrong cluster. Okay, now what we can see is all the things which are changing for HTTPS. The first thing in the deployment for the cluster collector, we have some arguments which are being now added. We're changing the liveness probe scheme to HTTPS. We're mounting the certificates. Same for now for the node collector. We are actually now doing very similar stuff. Volume mounts plus some arguments so that the stuff is being actually done. Also mounts again. Same here. And we are also adding our secrets where we have then our certificates mounted. And now we can just apply this. And now if we communicate to it, it will be on secure communications. First thing is we change then the rule set again. We enable again the enrichment. We now use HTTPS. We just use, don't want to ignore certificate errors, verify the certificate, save. And then let's hope everything works. Oh no. So we have an error in here, and now we have to find out where the error is. Yeah. There are two sources for the error. The one thing is for example, the certificate is not correct, which we have mounted. We go now a little bit into how Checkmk is, like how I debug it typically. Don't know how you do it typically. I'm not a Checkmk professional user. I go to my site, which I created. That's the community call site. It's a nice thing. Let's take a look at the command which is being executed for that agent. You can see directly the command. So this is the program which is being executed. And we can take this, and if we run this one from the site, we can also add a nice thing. We can add a debug command to it. And then you will see, okay, what is the actual problem? And I just can't connect. Excellent. The next thing which we can do if this happens is we take a look at if everything is still running as supposed in our cluster. There's one debug option which you can always use to see if everything is working as expected, is if you take a look at the logs from, for example, the node collector. Yeah. Which will not be the problem here, yeah, but let me also check if the service is correct. So the service is on node port on 3035. Should actually work as intended. Let's see if I did something wrong with the certificate.
Thomas has a comment. So can it be that the check doesn't try to connect to the node port?
It connects to the URL being specified. I mean, I tried it out this morning, so should work. It's not reachable. Just gonna try something quickly. I think I know what the problem is. I think I only can connect it via VPN to that one. If I do, like, our admins are changing our network at the moment, it might be related to that as well, but nope. I did somewhere an error. Let's try a different node. Yeah, excellent. Just as you wish it on the demo, that it doesn't work on the demo day.
And maybe if you answer some questions, maybe
yes,
it will try to sort itself out. So let's see. Son Kim is asking, so you mentioned the delay before alerting in case Kubernetes sorts everything out again. Will this at some point still alert if things keep churning for some reason?
Keep what?
Churning.
Churning? I found the problem, I think. I'm not sure what you mean with churning. If you can clarify.
Right, yeah, let's wait for their answer. So James is asking, is it tested on GKE?
Yes, and it works. have to wait. I did a little change in here to see. Any other question?
Right, about licensing model.
Mm-hmm.
Are you ready to answer this?
Yeah.
Is there some plan to change it, the model, for example, to have it based on vCPU of the cluster? Background: Openshift ships with around 300 to 400 pods. It looks like all results in host for Checkmk. Is this still valid in new versions in the context of Kubernetes? For Openshift would simply mean around 400 hosts licensed and no application running on the cluster yet. And a lot of things double checked, like pod, deployment, replica set service, etc.
In this case, what I would do is I would exclude these namespaces. If you don't want to monitor them because you don't have to, don't monitor them. That is the solution for that edge case. We have the concept in Checkmk that you basically pay for stuff which is of value for you, so which delivers you metrics. So which a service you pay, basically it's licensed per service, and the only way that's basically a common denominator across everything. Yeah. If we would, for example, say, hey, we charge for Kubernetes based on cores, imagine the complexity to the licensing model of everything, because you can obviously also charge on a switch by cores, probably even, but it gets very complicated pretty quickly, because it also requires that we have all this information somewhere. So we will always, like for now, we will always stick to the services. The only thing which we might at some point think about is going to a host-based pricing. But to a core-based pricing, I can't imagine that happening for Checkmk.
So now Sonke clarified what they mean with churning. I mean, if pods keep getting restarted, so they always return to a good state for a little while, and then get restarted again due to any reason at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What happens then is if a pod is being restarted, it typically gets a new unique ID. Like this stuff in the end changes. And when this happens, the pod is basically being deleted from Checkmk, and the new pod is being added. And if you use the dynamic configuration daemon in the Enterprise Edition, if you do it in the Raw Edition, you have to do that by yourself. So you have to basically adapt. You have to write a script which checks the folder with the Piggyback data and basically iterates over it and says, okay, hey, I have these new hosts that are there, add them. These are not here anymore, delete them. I'm super flabbergasted at this moment, because even connecting normally is not possible anymore. That's interesting. What I changed now is communication again to HTTP.
May has a comment. So isn't the cluster collector listening on a custom port?
The cluster collector itself is listening on port 8080 for internally for the service. Externally, it exposes data on, if you use node port, on the node port which is specified.
Sebastian also has a comment. So is there perhaps a typo in the secret that YAML? There seemed to be an additional dash after the pipe. Is that correct?
This could be a problem, definitely. I'm just going to quickly check if I deactivate HTTP. Yeah, there must be something wrong with the YAML which I created. because even HTTP is not working anymore. I hate certificates. Fortunately, we have Git. If maybe I deleted something else. We'll just try again. Just have to set the node pod again active. What I just did is basically I reset my entire back to my changes, because I'm pretty sure that I changed something when I copied the stuff into it. Helm diff. Yeah, that's. Okay. It's an interesting feature happening, or special case. I hope you can bear with me. I will just tear down the entire thing. That's, by the way, how you can get rid of it. So now we are deleting the entire cluster collector again. And we will just tear down everything and tear everything up again. That's the beauty with Kubernetes. You can just destroy and recreate quickly. We will do it immediately correctly with we will not do it immediately with HTTPS, because I want to see where I went wrong in the entire thing. So we'll do it step by step again. We basically have the stuff here. We have node TLS active. So we can just do a Helm install. Go to that one. We don't need this. Okay. This is the command which we need. Let's get our tokens again. Change the token inside Checkmk. So that should work. You know, I know the reason. I forgot the port here before. That's why I couldn't reach it, because I wrote like this. This is what I wrote, I think. And this is the address endpoint of my node. Without the node port, nothing will work. So in case you run into this problem, if you use node port, don't forget the node port. Let's take a look if it's working now. Yes. And now we try TLS again. I need again my beautiful certificates. Any questions while I do this?
None yet, but then I just want to acknowledge that Thomas said that he said that.
Oh shit, sorry, Thomas. I didn't understand what you meant. Pardon my wrong. So. So first let's add the cluster collector key. It's this. That's the certificate. Do our nice indentation again. Looks okay. Enable TLS. Let's verify again. Helm diff. Okay, this looks okay. And let's make it secure again. Okay. Go to our Kubernetes rule again. And now we just change here to HTTPS. Verify certificate. And now let's hope that it works. I hope our boss Jan isn't here anymore.
I'm listening and enjoying myself.
Oh. Yes. Almost working. So at least the connection now to the collector is working. And let's take a look at what could, for example, be the next troubleshooting area which we can do. Because the one thing which you can see now, nodes with collectors is 0. And that means, okay, nothing is sending stuff. So we need to take a look at that, which is, actually, I'm very happy that all these things are happening because that helps me do all the troubleshooting live. And whenever someone has a problem, I just point them to this video where they can see all the problems which could happen. Yeah. The one thing is we can do is we execute this command to see what is now available. Yeah, and we can see, hey, there is only one cluster collector running in here. If we take a look, and that's not enough. Somehow these are not sending the data correctly, and you can already see they're restarting here. One that has restarted, that sounds or looks like something is not working properly. Yeah. Best way to check that is go into the logs of one of these pods. Let's take this one, for example. We also need to specify the container. And if we look at the logs, we can see, okay, what is the problem? Some SSL problem in here. Excellent. Let's look at so it can't connect to my cluster collector service. Which is there. Take a look at our, we can also take a look at the logs from our cluster collector. Can anyone spot the problem? This was missing.
That's a comment. I noticed when you copied the CA certs into the variables.yaml file, yeah, you missed. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, you. Let me check if I forgot anything else. So, yeah. So it would be nice if actually Helm would tell you that. Maybe we have to build in some verification that certificates are being entered properly. Helm diff, let's try see again. So should you can see, so this is now being properly recreated. If I install it, and then I hope everything works. Because obviously if the CS certificate is not there, then let's do our Checkmk monitoring pods. Now everything is being recreated. Let's take a look at one of the logs of one of these pods. And bam! You can see here in the logs that it was able to connect with HTTPS and was able to send the machine sections, for example, to the cluster collector. And now if we look into Checkmk, the first thing we can see already is that here the nodes with collectors are now 3, and we already also see now the usage data. It was a little bit more bumpy, but at least we were able to figure out a little bit where things can go wrong, what to do, then in these cases where to debug. So I always like to go into Checkmk, run the program from Checkmk if I run into any problems. If you did everything by the documentation, then everything should be fine. If you, however, for example, mistype certificates, forget stuff, and then you want to troubleshoot, I think these are really helpful things to do to find your way around. Want to hint something which is currently being created by my colleague Sebastian. The documentation in detail for the monitoring Kubernetes. You can find the current version in the master branch in our documentation. It's being written at the moment, so bear in mind all the things which are being changed. It can also help you. You can use the documentation on our GitHub. You can use this, whatever you prefer. At some point when this is finished, we will take some of the documentation from GitHub out and refer to the documentation here, because this will be more extensive and it also has screenshots along the way and it's a little bit more visual. It explains the installation if you use the manifests. So if you don't want to use Helm charts, you can follow this guide to set up via manifests. Yeah. One thing that you can see in here is, in this very fresh one, you will not be able to see the Kubernetes dashboards yet. For the Kubernetes dashboards, you will have to wait a couple of days until we put them into a beta release. The ones which I showed in the beginning. Questions?
There's no questions yet.
Okay.
Yes, everyone, the floor is open.
So just shoot them. We are currently still adding more checks to it. So while almost everything else for Checkmk 2.1 is finished, our piece, the Kubernetes piece, is still missing a couple of things. The dashboards, for example, a couple of checks, and the Openshift piece, which will be done after 2.1. And as soon as that is running, I think we will have a really nice Kubernetes monitoring inside Checkmk, which is I looked at a lot of different Kubernetes monitorings from other tools, and we tried to build something which is better than what other tools deliver. If you have any ideas how we can even improve it, just shoot any email to me, and you can reach. You can reach me, my first name dot last name @tribe29.com.
Thomas is saying that he has no questions, but he can't wait to try it out. So it looks more awesome than anything I've seen so far regarding Kubernetes. I knew if someone could do it, it would be Tribe29 with Checkmk. Thanks, guys. You're awesome.
Cool. Thanks.
Thomas. Right. We got a question on YouTube. For services that are provided by pods and exposed as services or ingress, will certificate expiry checking automatically be done?
That's a great idea. At some point, yes. We have to build a generic way how to do that, and that's the most difficult thing. So for everything which we do, it will always work for a specific environment. We always have to develop it in a way so that it works for everything. So what I have envisioned for services checking is actually ideally check also the HTTP endpoint of the pod or application running behind the service to see if that is healthy. But that's my current dream, and kind of trying to find a way to get there.
Right, there are no other questions yet.
By the way, join our Checkmk conference, because if you're interested not only in Kubernetes, you will learn a lot of stuff on other things there as well. I will also do a talk on Kubernetes, a little bit more refined than this one. This one was more how do you get it actually working, how to try it out, all the stuff which we plan in the future, all the things how you can actually solve problems with it, will be part of the conference then.
Thanks, Martin. That I think was a great piece of work by you and the team. So now let's hope for lots of community feedback. And I enjoyed the session very much.
It's maybe a quick survey to our viewers. Like, so do you like Kubernetes monitoring that's coming to Checkmk 2.1? What's your initial feeling? And Nico is saying it looks very promising.
By the way, thank you, Nico, for all the help. So actually, we had a lot of help from a lot of users in getting there. Nico is one of them and helped us along many different ways to get there and is still continuing to help us.
And Nico is looking forward to running this in prod. Right. So if there's no more questions, so I've left Martin's email on the chat, also on YouTube. So happy to hear that everyone's excited to try it. So yeah, Martin, your email is all over the place now.
It's
So
anyway out there because on all the old job ads, my email address was out.
Right. So yes.
By the way, if you want to take a look at, good way. If you want to take a look at the Kubernetes monitoring, we just implemented something new, which is our new demo server. Unfortunately, I destroyed our AWS Kubernetes monitoring while doing this community call. That's why there are a lot of errors now in here. And if you want to take a look at the Kubernetes monitoring, you can also take a look at it in here, play.checkmk.com. We are building a nice environment up there with a lot of different endpoints, a lot of different visualizations that you want to build in. And they can also see, the Emerson stuff, the EKS stuff, which is currently all broken because I destroyed it. But if you want to take a look and play around and see the services, go on play.checkmk.com.
Right. So I think that's all for today. So thanks so much for tuning in. And yeah, I hope this new time worked out. And thanks a lot, Martin, for the presentation. I think it's interesting to see like how things could go wrong and how can it be solved. Yeah, Federico has a comment. Yeah, very interesting and useful presentation. Enjoyed the debugging session. Not using Kubernetes yet, but we're Checkmk users and are appreciative of this overview as we may move to Kubernetes in the future. Yeah, that's really great to hear. Right. So thank you everyone for joining. If you have any requests on what we should talk about next, so perhaps we're gonna talk about 2.1 in the next months. So it's estimated to be released in May. So yeah, we're looking forward and we're looking forward to like what you will think about it. So yeah, I'm just gonna leave here our survey, like give us your feedback about the community call on how we can improve and just send in the topics that you want us to talk about in the future. So yes, thanks all for joining. Hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.